Hello and welcome to HBM's Cryptid-Corner for Wednesday, January 26, 2022. We have a few things to talk about, so let's get started. A Native American named Hollyana Cougar Tracks has put together some interesting artwork. Hollyana Cougar Tracks has provided several images of her artwork, much of which is made from upcycled plastic waste, to accompany her 1/22/22 interview on Bigfoot with Connie Willis. This is what she made, mostly out of recycled plastic, a 14-foot Bigfoot. Lifts the sky, she calls it. Bigfoot plastic keepsake. This is an example of the Bigfoot I make out of upcycled plastic. Beaded Bigfoot. I'm a master bead worker. This is one example of beaded Bigfoot I make. Pretty neat. Bigfoot print. A card block print I made and print cards with. Bigfoot and Turtle gift box. A miniature gift used when I tell a story about how Turtle befriended Bigfoot by giving him a flower. That's pretty neat. That is pretty neat. Next is an Nessie story. Loch Ness Monster sightings get simple detail wrong as probe sheds new light on mystery. Nessie is often depicted looking like a plesiosaur with a long neck and head emerging from the water, but a recent study of a fossilized Elasmosaurus, which is a type of plesiosaur, has revealed they didn't hold their heads that way. Loch Ness Monster sightings could be getting one simple detail wrong as a new investigation into prehistoric fossils has shed light on the mystery. Nessie is often depicted looking like a plesiosaur with a long neck and a head emerging from the water, which was seen in the famous surgeon's photograph from 1934. However, a recent study of a fossilized Elasmosaurus, which is a type of plesiosaur, has revealed that these prehistoric creatures didn't hold their heads that way. Instead, the Elasmosaurus held his head below or level with his body, Dr. Paul Schofield, a curator at Canterbury Museum in New Zealand, has said. He said, the labyrinth of the ear works best when the tiny bones within are able to hang unaffected by gravity. For this reason, the position of the inner ear within the skull of an animal reveals a lot about how an animal habitually holds its head. We've examined the inner ear of Elasmosaurs and determined that their resting position was with the head horizontal to the body or even well below the body. Now, of course, this is the famous surgeon's photograph from here. This implies that they probably did not frequently hold their heads up high. The theory that Nessie is a living Elasmosaurus was promoted by Dennis Tucker, once a prominent zoologist at London's Natural History Museum. He was allegedly fired in 1960 over his beliefs and later died in France in 2009. However, new research is shedding light on the difference between the popular image of Nessie and what a real Elasmosaurus looks like. Dr. Schofield said the traditional posture in many a popular article on Nessie, like a sock puppet, is not something Elasmosaurs were in the habit of adopting. The idea of it lifting its head up like a sock puppet is extremely unlikely. The scientist and his colleagues made their findings conducting a CT scan on the Elasmosaurus remains. It is thought the prehistoric creature held his head down this way to feed from the seabed. Dr. Schofield said they have these enormous teeth arranged in rows like a grappling iron. It has been hypothesized that they floated on the surface and dredged the seafloor, blowing the dirt out through their teeth and leaving just the clams. Thus, their feeding method dictates the neck length. It's just like the giraffe, but in reverse. This theory may explain to believers why Nessie is rarely seen with its head above water. However, Dr. Schofield is skeptical that Nessie exists and says it's further proof that the monster is a myth. He said, "I totally reject the idea that Nessie exists and that it is an Elasmosaurus. Loch Ness Monster records are a mixture of fakes and mistakes." Dr. Schofield and his colleagues published their study into the Elasmosaurus in the Journal of Vertebrate Paleontology. In 1934, Sargent's photograph is now widely believed to be a hoax that was created with a toy submarine and wood putty. Dr. Schofield also highlighted that the scientific name for Nessie proposed by conservationist Sir Peter Scott, Nesceteris rhombopteryx, is an anagram of monster hoax by Sir Peter X. The official Loch Ness Monster Sightings Register contains 6 entries for 2021. So, is Nessie an Elasmosaurus, which is a type of plesiosaur? Or is it something else? We don't know. We have no idea. We won't know until we have a base specimen. But that may be difficult. May be difficult to obtain. Next, we turn to Bigfoot in England, the mysterious ape man of Kent, England. Big, hairy, ape-like creatures like Bigfoot have been seen all over the world, known by many names and eluding all attempts to capture them or even to truly understand them. Sightings have happened in numerous far-flung places, but sometimes they seem to appear in places they have no business being. There have been creatures like this reported from the most unlikely of places, including Japan, Hawaii, and the United Kingdom as well, defying all apparent reason or logic. In England especially, hairy hominids have been sighted surprisingly frequently in all areas of the region, including Britain, Ireland, and Scotland. And one area that has a history of such sightings going way back is the county of Kent in southeast England. There is no reason at all why a giant ape man would have any business being here at all. Yet, if sightings are to be believed, the anomalous beast has been lurking around here for quite a while. Kent is a county that borders Greater London to the northwest, Surrey to the west, and East Sussex to the southwest, and Essex to the north across the estuary of the River Thames. And reports of large, hairy ape-like beasts have been going on here for some time, with one of the earliest such reports coming from all the way back in 1858, from the area of Great Chart, Ashford. The witness was apparently a worker at a wheat field called Buck's Farm, where he was toiling away one day when he saw a rather strange sight when he saw a large baboon-type creature just sitting there out in the field. A report in the Kentish Gazette at the time said of the weird incident and what followed. Not knowing, indeed, whether it might not be certain unmentionable personage in bodily shape, i.e. Satan, its appearance had the effect of utterly scattering his senses, and when he collected enough of them to make up his mind to a speedy retreat, fear had so unnerved his limbs that he was at first unable to get over a stile which led out of the field. He, however, at last did so, and we may suppose reached his home with his hair standing on end, and related the tale of the awful summat he had seen. But the shock was so great it has made him ill. On the affair becoming known, it is reported, several of the stout men of Great Chart, well armed, made a search in the fields, but did not succeed in catching the animal, whatever it might be. While one party, probably inclining to the supposition of the thing being his satanic majesty harbored thereabouts, took a horse and cart and went to Ashford in order to bring back aid from the police in taking him into custody. Since then it is reported that the animal, which is set down as a baboon escaped from some show, has been seen in several adjacent parishes, but we have not heard of its capture or of any damage done by it, except indirectly, through persons trampling down the wheat in Mr. Greenhill's field while in search of it. This mysterious creature is said to have turned up here again, a little girl having seen it on Tuesday near Newgate Wood, and although greatly frightened, retained sufficient self-possession to be enabled afterwards to describe it. Since then, more than one burly individual in the parish has acknowledged to having been startled from his propriety by a glimpse of it. One who was going to count some sheep, having left his job, made the best of his way homewards. The children of the National School had a holiday, and with a number of the inhabitants joined in general hunt of the woods, but when wanted the creature is not to be seen, and no traces of it could be discovered, although it was considered that the thick undergrowth prevented such careful search as was desirable. Was this just an escaped baboon or something else? Moving along in years to 1942, there was an account given by an elderly lady and dug up by Bigfoot researcher Neil Arnold. According to him, the woman had her experience during those dark days of World War II, when one day she was enjoying a quiet day with her husband in a 200-acre wooded park called the Tunbridge Wells Common in Royal Tunbridge Wells, located around 40 miles from London. As they sat there enjoying the serenity of the quiet park, they heard something behind them, and their day would get very weird indeed. The report reads, one particular day she went to the common with her husband and was sitting on a bench when they became aware of a shuffling noise behind them. Upon turning around, both her husband and herself saw what she described as a tall, hairy ape-like creature with eyes that were burning a reddish color, and it was moving towards them at a slow pace. They observed this creature for some time until they became afraid, and they both fled, terrified. She went on to say that they told the police and members of their family, thinking that a gorilla had escaped from a zoo, but were laughed at and were not believed. From 1987, we have a report from the town of Seven Oaks. The witness, known only as J. Smith, claims that he had gone out to a pub with some friends, after which they had gone out to chat at a barbecue at a hill called One Tree Hill. The location is described as being full of scrub and trees, thick scrub and trees. They arrived and began putting together a fire, gathering wood near the top of the hill. That was when their eating would get quite strange, and the witness says, my friend started gathering wood from the left side, and I started from the right. About 10 minutes in, I heard a very deep growl. I dismissed it as cows or sheep from the valley below. But then a couple of minutes later, whatever it was on my side and coming my way. It had real depth to it. That gave the impression it was of a significant size. I placed my firewood on the fire, and at the same time my friend joined me. Just as we did so, the grunt sounded again. This time it was a matter of yards away and very loud. I looked at my friend, and my friend looked at me, and we both said, run! As I ran, I caught a glimpse of a bipedal figure illuminated from the tree line. It was huge. Now, the next day, less than 1.5 miles from the area, a lorry driver driving through a remote road said he had nearly hit an orangutan at 6:30 in the morning. Driver stated that it was an orangey red in color. This was on the road from Ide Hill to Seven Oaks South. This made the local newspapers the same week. I didn't tell anyone. What did these people see? Just a few years later, there would be some weird sightings made in the vicinity of a park called Bluebell Hill, which is already a spooky place known for ghosts and phantom black cats, but it seems it can also add Bigfoot to its list of strangeness. In 1990, there came in several reports of a bipedal ape-like creature lurking around the area, and in one case, the group of 5 Territorial Army members claimed to have shouted at it and thrown stones at it to scare it away. At the time, it was written off as an escaped gorilla from a zoo, but no zoos have reported such an animal missing. Was this just a big hoax or something else? Most recently of all, there was a series of sightings of a massive Bigfoot-like creature lurking about the Tunbridge Wells Common. The creature was first seen in 2012 by a walker who claimed that it was 8 feet tall and had red demonic eyes, long arms, and was covered in hair. The creature apparently roared at him, after which the unnamed witness fled in terror. What seems to be the same creature also hit the news again as recently as 2021, when a woman out walking her dog in the very same area also claims to have seen it. She would say of her encounter, "It was winter time. There were no bushes and no leaves on the trees. I was walking the dog, and out of the corner of my eye I saw somebody walking. It was big. As I looked at it, it ducked behind a big bush. It ducked behind the bush and disappeared. My dog gave chase and chased it all along the train track. It had very big long strides with swinging arms." The area supposedly had several other sightings that same year and gained itself the nickname of the Kentish Ape Man. As weird as the notion of a creature like Bigfoot lurking about the countryside of England may seem, Kent is not the only place to have such reports, and accounts of these beasts have come from all over the United Kingdom. British Bigfoot researcher Deborah Hatswell has spent decades compiling such reports and has even meticulously compiled a sort of Bigfoot map of the UK, and she says of it, "Where do you go to report seeing something 7 feet tall, completely covered in hair that looks like the Bigfoot creature reported in North America, Canada, and Russia? I've collected these reports in Scotland, Wales, Ireland, and England. Over the years, as I have collected and saved the reports made by other people nationwide, and I not only saved them, I plotted them on a map. My witnesses range from Army personnel, police officers, game wardens, wild campers, and hundreds of people out walking the dog or taking a leisurely hike. As you can see from the map, provided there are no sweet spots, the reports happen all across the UK. There are clusters in areas like Cannock Chase, the Medway, Thetford Forest, and Cove Durham, and the Highlands where the reports are all together in one area, stretching back decades, and there are lone reports in some areas. It is hard to know what to make of such reports from Kent and beyond. There is absolutely no reason for such creatures to be here, and it seems highly unlikely that even if this was some sort of undiscovered animal, they would remain hidden in England of all places. This is not exactly the darkest reaches of the uncharted, so what is going on here? One idea is that these creatures could represent some seeping over from another dimension, perhaps through the various ley lines or earth energy lines that supposedly run through the UK. This could possibly explain why they are only seen sporadically and are able to remain mostly undetected, leaving no evidence behind because they are basically phasing in and out of this reality. Another idea is that they could be what are called tulpas, which are basically thought form entities conjured up into our reality by sheer will and belief alone. Or maybe it is all just overactive imaginations and hoaxes. Whatever the case may be, England certainly has its share of Bigfoot sightings, and it occupies one very strange corner of the world of the weird. So, are there Bigfoot in England? That's a good question. Witnesses swear there are. I believe the next report I'm going to talk about is also about Bigfoot in England. Finally, the biggest cryptozoological puzzle, the British Bigfoot. Brent Swancer's latest article, The Mysterious Ape Man of Kent, England, makes for fascinating reading. It's a little known fact that there are numerous reports of what can be termed British Bigfoot. Of course, the idea that huge lumbering beasts of a Bigfoot type could be roaming around the UK is ridiculous. And yet, that's what appears to be happening. As Brent says, in England especially, hairy hominids have been sighted surprisingly frequently in all areas of the region, including Britain, Ireland, and Scotland. And one area that has a history of such sightings going way back is the county of Kent in southeast England. There is no reason at all for why a giant ape man would have any business being here at all. Yet, if sightings are to be believed, the anomalous beast has been lurking around here for quite a while. Brent is well to use the words the anomalous beast, as just about everything about these creatures is downright weird. My interest in this subject goes back to when I was a teenager. It all revolved around the strange hair-covered hominid that had been given the name of the man monkey. Fortunately, the animal, yes, there was just one. There usually is in the British Bigfoot cases. Lurked barely half an hour or so from where I lived, so it was road trip time. From a bookseller whose name and location have now well and truly been long lost in the inevitable fog of time, I had ordered a cheap, used hardback copy of Janet and Colin Board's excellent book, Alien Animals. A classic and essential title that dug deep into the many worldwide legends and tales of ghostly black dogs, mysterious big cats, hairy man beasts, winged monstrosities, and those unknown denizens of the deep, such as the Loch Ness Monster, Ogopogo, as well as a multitude of sea serpents. It was 1986, I still very well recall, when the copy Alien Animals finally arrived in the mail. I eagerly sat down to read it and found mention of the infamous man monkey, a bizarre, shining-eyed, Bigfoot-type creature that I had never previously come across, but that the board said haunted Bridge 39 on the Shropshire Union Canal, Staffordshire. This was of particular interest to me. It so transpired that where the creature lurked was actually very close to that of my daily van driving route, as I worked for a paint wallpaper store at the time. Now this is the place, this is the Bridge 39, the lair of the man monkey. Picture taken by Nick Redfern. It was within the packed pages of Charlotte Sophia Burns' book of 1883, Shropshire Folklore, that the unholy antics of what some have since perceived to be the closest thing that Britain may have to the North American Bigfoot and the Yeti of the Himalayas were first unleashed upon an unsuspecting general public. According to Byrne, a very weird story of an encounter with an animal ghost arose of late years within my knowledge. On the 21st of January 1879, a laboring man was employed to take a cart of luggage from Ranton in Staffordshire to Woodcock, beyond Newport in Shropshire, for the ease of a party of visitors who were going from one house to another. He was late in coming back. His horse was tired and could only crawl along at a foot's pace, so that it was 10 o'clock at night when he arrived at the place where the high road crosses the Birmingham and Liverpool Canal. It was then, Byrne faithfully recorded, that the man received what was undoubtedly the most terrifying shock of his entire life, before or since it seems pretty safe to assume. Just before he reached the canal bridge, a strange black creature with great white eyes sprang out of the plantation by the roadside and alighted on his horse's back. He tried to push it off with his whip, but to his horror the whip went through the thing, and he dropped it on the ground in fright. Needless to say, Byrne added, the poor tired horse broke into a canter and rushed onwards at full speed with the ghost still clinging to its back. How the creature at length vanished the man hardly knew, but the story was far from over, Byrne learned. He told his tale in the village of Woodsies, a mile further on, and so effectively frightened the hearers that one man actually stayed with friends all night, rather than cross the terrible bridge which lay between him and his home. Byrne's wild story continued that, by the time he reached the village of Woodsies, the unnamed man was in a state of excessive terror, and promptly retired to his bed for several days, so much was he prostrated by his fright. Byrne also recorded that on the following day, another individual traveled back to the sinister bridge, and sure enough, there was the man's whip, still lying at the very place where it had fallen to the ground after the nightmarish and bizarre encounter. Almost inevitably, dark tales of the crazed beast and its infernal nighttime activities began to spread like absolute wildfire throughout the little villages and hamlets of the area, as Byrne quickly learned and recorded thus in her book. The adventure, as was natural, was much talked of in the neighborhood, and, of course, with all sorts of variations. Most regrettably, Byrne failed to elaborate on the particular nature of these variations in gossip. But it seems that the local constabulary had heard all about the nature and exploits of the hairy demon and knew exactly what was afoot. As Byrne carefully chronicled, some days later the man's master was surprised by a visit from a policeman, who came to request him to give information of his having been stopped and robbed on the Big Bridge on the night of the 21st of January. The master, who apparently was very much amused by this development in the escalating and seemingly mutating story, carefully explained to the visiting policeman that this was completely untrue, and that in reality there was his employee who had reported a strange encounter at the Big Bridge, but that there was most definitely no robbery involved at all. Interestingly, when the real details of what had occurred were related to the policeman, he was seemingly completely nonplussed, came to the realization that no actual crime had been committed at all, and merely replied in a distinctly matter-of-fact fashion, "Oh, was that all, sir? Oh, I know what that was. That was the man-monkey, sir, as does come again to that bridge ever since the man was drowned in the cut." Charlotte Byrne also revealed that she personally had the opportunity to speak with the man's employer, but also to our cost today, she did not expand upon the specific nature of the conversation within the pages of Shropshire folklore. Nevertheless, Byrne did describe the master as being a Mr. B of... And although the man's name remains unknown to us, and probably always will remain so, this is very possibly and probably quite likely a reference to the nearby ancient Staffordshire city of Lichfield. So what precisely was the strange hairy critter that was seen wildly roaming distinctly darkened corners of the Shropshire Union Canal by moonlight on that winter's night way back in January 1879? Was it truly some form of Bigfoot or Yeti-like entity? Could it potentially have been an exotic escapee of the simian kind, and possibly one that originated with a private zoo somewhere in the area, or even a traveling menagerie of the type that were indeed popular back then? Did it have wholly supernatural and paranormal origins, rather than purely physical ones, or was it something else entirely? The fact is that we have very few answers and a lot of questions for what the man-monkey was and still is. That's right, people are still seeing this semi-spectral, ape-like thing. In the next part of this story, I'll address the undeniably paranormal side of the British Bigfoot. So, again, is there a British Bigfoot? Are there a Bigfoot in Britain? That's a good question. And the answers are not easy to come by. And that's going to do it for this week. I want to thank you very much for tuning in. You guys are the heart of the show. I always say that, but I always mean it. And I'll continue to do this as long as you guys want me to. And hey, until next week, y'all be good or be good at it. This is HBM's Crypto Corner.